The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Good evening and welcome to the Leadership with Biana Kovic show. Thank you for being with us tonight. Our topic, leadership, focuses on leaders such as yourselves. We believe that leadership is a skill that can be learned through practice and awareness. We hope that our conversation will help you become more effective and reflective when it comes to your own leadership practices and enable you to leave a positive legacy. Our very special guest tonight is Merilee Kern. Merilee is a branding, business, and entrepreneurship success pundit who holds MBA and is an influential media voice and lauded communications strategist. As the owner of the boutique PR firm Kern Communications and as executive editor and producer of the Luxe List international news syndicate, she's revered trends expert and industry voice of authority who spotlights noteworthy marketplace changemakers, movers, and shakers. Marilee may be reached online at www.kerncommunications.com for PR or at www.theluxelist.com. She can be also followed on Twitter at LuxeListEditor and on Facebook www.facebook.com/theluxelist. Marilee, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Marilee, you are the creator, executive producer, and a host of the Savvy Living TV show that airs on CBS TV KPIX San Francisco, which is a number 6 U.S. market. Can you tell us a little bit more about your show?
Sure. It's a lifestyle talk show. It airs on the weekends. And basically, the premise is guests, gifts, gets, and getaways. So there's a segment or two in the show where we're connecting with really compelling subject matter experts or authors, various field experts talking about very relevant and timely and compelling topics. It could be anything from technologies to innovations or maybe a recent book launch or tips just to help you in your daily life, various guest interviews. Mm-hmm. We then transit to the gifts and getaways block where we're featuring really innovative and compelling products. Brands that are out there on the market, people might want to get for themselves. They're life enhancing in one way or another. Or, maybe they want to give as gifts to others. We've got the holidays coming up and that kind of thing. And then at the end of the show, we talk about getaways. Mm-hmm. Fantastic locations and destinations, not just domestically, abroad as well, that folks might want to consider for their own travel and vacation planning. So it's a 30-minute show and we cover a lot of ground.
I actually had a chance to see your show, so I was very impressed that, as you mentioned, you're very broad. It talks about from getaways to specific products that helps you with aging and other things. How do you go about choosing your guests?
Sure. Kind of time of year dictates a lot. Like I said, we're heading into the holiday season. Then after that, for example, the first quarter of 2019, we have the Consumer Electronics Show, which is a really big event for technology in the course of a year. It's also New Year's resolution season and, all things health and self-care and that kind of thing. So I try to make the content, relevant to the time of year and that kind of thing. But, when a guest is presented to me, if they have something that's really just helpful for my audience, really holistically, the whole show is intended to enhance or improve the viewer's life in one way or another. So as long as the topic at hand and the advice being disseminated achieves that goal, then it's a perfect guest for the show.
Mm-hmm. And I know that your guests, you have a pretty broad range, about 2.5 million people are watching your show. Do you know the age group that usually, watches your show?
Sure. I've been fortunate. KPIX, that's the CBS affiliate in San Francisco, and that's the number 6 U.S. market, the DMA, and that market boasts about 2.5 million TV households. So it's a very large market. There's a lot of potential for exposure there. The fact that I'm a kind of a daytime talk show, it tends to skew probably heavier towards women, all age ranges, really everything from millennials up through even seniors. Again, things that I'm covering are just lifestyle enhancing products, and the technologies or the brands or the solutions that I feature are as relevant for, younger folks often as they are for older. Every once in a while, I might have a segment that's geared more towards one audience or another, and, I'll sort of frame it up that way. But generally speaking, I would say, although there's plenty of men that do watch the show, most definitely. But I would say because it's a lifestyle talk show, it probably is just geared a little bit heavier on the side of women.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I really want to talk to you about, you're an expert on brand and PR strategies. Could you tell us a little bit more why branding is so important?
It is. There's so much competition in today's marketplace. Even in what are so-called niche categories, there's still variations and derivatives, and it's really just so difficult to rise above the noise today, set your product apart from others in the marketplace, whether the competition is real or perceived, one way or the other, there's still competition out there. So branding, effective branding and having a plan and a roadmap is just, developing a very concerted way to navigate all of that, all of the challenges that are out there. How are you going to articulate your unique selling propositions and that kind of thing in what has become just an extraordinarily crowded marketplace.
Mm-hmm. So, I spoke to other experts and they say that when it comes to branding, storytelling is the most important, according to them. What are your thoughts on storytelling when it comes to branding?
Storytelling is important because it develops a narrative and a context, to put that product in. People want to be emotionally engaged with a product. They want to get behind it. They want to believe in it. And really, most importantly, they want to envision that product in their life. How is it helping and enhancing and benefiting them? And, they need to feel that. They need to envision that. So even beyond the art, which it is of storytelling in a branding context, there's an expert that I work with, Kevin Lund. He talks about conversation marketing, where it's this one step further. Not only are you developing this story and this narrative, but you're doing so by just speaking human, as he calls it. You're having a conversation with folks. It's not always fancy marketing speak and jargon and alliteration and all these, slick things that work in advertising and other contexts. Really effective marketing has really gotten down to how brands are engaging with that marketplace, and being able to speak human in the course of storytelling is just key.
Mm-hmm. So how do you know if your storytelling or conversation marketing is actually hitting the marks that you want to hit and is actually selling the product?
Today it's all about analytics. There's any number of ways that, you can slice and dice tracking of your various brand endeavors. And branding, crosses a lot of boundaries. Branding's part of advertising and marketing and business development and public relations. There's an aspect of branding, there has to be synergy across all of that. And the analytical tools that are employed to measure results from each of those endeavors, are different and often specific, to those different realms. But the bottom line is there really should be measures and analytical tools in place, even with something, like PR, which can get a little bit more difficult to track. It's, sometimes PR is not very linear. It's not a direct line. There was coverage and the phone's ringing off the hook. It's not often that linear. So, there are ways and strategies and tools to be put in place to handle those measurements and analytics. And that's part of the brand planning that we mentioned at the top of the interview. That all factors in so you can have that roadmap and you're not sort of scrambling and guessing as you're in the execution phase.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that if you feel that your storytelling is not hitting the mark, it's worth of changing the strategy, right?
Absolutely. If you're aware that early on in your initiative, your message is not resonating, it's not pulling, it's not meeting expectations early on, my recommendation, is definitely to sort of cut your losses there and and shift. There's a lot of, and I don't know if ego is the right word, but there's a lot of work and effort goes into planning and recommendations. Often there's very expensive agencies in the mix, and they have strategized and made their recommendations. So by the time, you're executing, there's been a lot of resources, time, effort, money put into that. So understandably, brands and companies are very reluctant to shift gears, especially if it is fairly early on and they're like, well, just give it a chance and give it time, but at some point, the art of being able to pivot is just as important. I mean, if you just know your early metrics and measurements are really just demonstrating this approach, this messaging, whatever it is not meeting the mark, is not resonating, small tweaks, small variables, go ahead and make some kind of shift or pivot, because that adaptability, and that's often what sets a successful company apart in this uber fast, just extremely fast-paced and changing marketplace, is that ability to adapt and work very quickly and to pivot and shift. Difficult for some companies. There's a gauntlet of approvals, there's red tape, but to the extent that that's possible, I definitely advocate it.
So, in this show, we talk a lot about reinvention and reinvention, personal reinvention, company reinvention. What are your thoughts on reinvention itself?
I like it. I mean, I think it's important for companies to stay relevant and fresh and compelling. And today's marketplace and mindset and sensibilities are vastly different than they were 5, 10, certainly 20 years ago. And, no matter how successful a company is, how much longevity they had, innovation is key. I mean, it's innovate or die in this kind of marketplace. So I think being able to reinvent yourself, and I know it doesn't always mean an entire departure from what you've been doing previously. It can be just small tweaks and changes, but I do think it's very, very important as part of that reinvention. I really define that as just staying fresh, staying relevant, keeping your pulse on what the marketplace cares about today for your short-term planning, projecting some longer-term strategies, and constantly, again, being able to adapt and pivot.
So talking about a marketplace, you're also a lifestyle expert, and I know that you have a Luxe List, right, where you talk about items that people should have, but more so. Can you tell us a little bit more about Luxe List, what it is? And
Sure. The Luxe List is by premise a brand review platform. So whether it's a physical product, maybe it's an intangible like an app, maybe it's a destination. It's sort of the evolution of the brand work that I've been doing and, helping to advise the marketplace on brands that are vetted and they're tried and true, and whether they're looking for gift ideas or products to, enhance their own lives or a travel destination, they can go to the Luxe List, through which we cover products editorially, so through articles that run both on the Luxe List, and we have a vast publishing partner network. So the Luxe List stories run in various magazines and online websites, a bunch of publishers and syndicates. They can find advice that way. We do television segments, radio segments. It's a cross-media platform. But one way or the other, they can go to the Luxe List and know that they can find a product if they're looking for a self-care solution or something for skincare or a gift idea for the holidays or Valentine's Day, whatever it is. Know that we've reviewed it, we've touched the product, we've seen the packaging, we know the company's legitimate. The claims are, what they say in the marketing materials and all of that. So, consumers can have the confidence when they're shopping.
And I know that Luxe List also has interviews, and as you mentioned, they can subscribe, right?
Yes, there is a newsletter for the Luxe List. And we do, every once in a while, we'll do celebrity interviews or experts, various subject matter experts. This could be everything from a chef or a celebrity or a developer of a technology, or maybe, it's the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. So the interviews are very wide-ranging as well.
So another thing that you do, you're also an entrepreneur. You're actually a serial entrepreneur, but you also own a Kern Communications. Can you tell us a little bit more about that company?
I do. So the Luxe List is my journalistic endeavor. That's where I'm reporting myself. I'm on various television shows or, writing the articles that are being published elsewhere. So that's sort of the journalism endeavor of mine on the public relations side of the fence. For over 15 years now, I've had Kern Communications, which is a boutique public relations company, which is your traditional organic PR companies, whether they have products or whether they're a CEO or an author or a speaker and they're looking for thought leadership publicity. One way or the other, the folks that I work with on the Kern Communications side are looking to work through the media to tell their story, to gain that publicity. So I'll execute campaigns of that nature, sort of regular PR services.
And when you talk about PR, in your opinion, what is a good PR?
Well, it depends. Every public relations campaign is just completely unique unto itself. Whether you're doing a launch campaign, maybe it's a book launch or a product launch. Maybe you're doing, again, a thought leadership campaign for a CEO who's just looking to raise their professional profile. Maybe they're looking to get a book deal or looking to, increase the amount of speaking endeavors. So it really depends on what the goal is of the client. And that's always actually my first question when I have a client. What does a PR win look like? If there was one PR placement from your work with me, from your engagement with me, what would that be? And then I'll reverse engineer the campaign from that so that I can work towards achieving that goal and hopefully delivering that placement to the client. So definitely not a cookie cutter agency. Every client gets just one-on-one service, very customized, bespoke PR that's completely tailored around them, their products, their industry, the current news cycle, what's going on at that time, and ultimately their goal and objective.
And how long should one have a PR agency for? Is it a 6-month thing? Is it a year thing? In order for it to be successful? What is your experience?
Well, in a perfect world, if we take budget out of the picture, because, let's face it, budget is always dictating how many PR campaigns a person or a company, will sign on for. But if you take budget and cost completely out of the picture, it would be optimal to execute a PR campaign. My recommendation, whether you're an author or any other company, typically at least once a month, because there's something called campaign continuity, where, some PR agencies, not mine, but some will actually lock clients into a contract of at least 3 months, suggesting that you really need this amount of time just to cultivate and get a foothold and develop that conversation with the media. And that's actually legitimate. It's not the way I work. I don't lock folks into contracts. I'm perfectly fine. I do project-based work. If they just want to do one campaign with me, hey, that's great. If they want more, that's fine too. So I don't lock that in, but I do understand why other agencies do, because, there's truth to it. You really do need time to cultivate, and coverage often begets coverage. So it's sort of like, the longer term you're on for, the more those placements and those results can build up. So, again, authors especially, because, they're subject matter experts usually. So whether it's a launch campaign or thought leadership, the role of the publicist is to help determine, okay, we did this campaign last month. Here's a fresh new campaign idea that we can execute this month. That's not redundant to what we've already done. It's fresh, it's new, it speaks to what's going on in the current news cycle. So in a perfect world, that would sort of be happening at least once a month, for that continuity. Because, authors want publicity ongoing, not just at the book launch stage. Again, budget tends to dictate that, and that's just not realistic for folks. So I say, do as many PR campaigns as you can afford. Maybe that's once a quarter, 2 times a year, whatever that is. But I do feel, the one and done PR campaigns, there's plenty of folks that do that, and I do very well delivering for them. Not the optimal way to go about it, but certainly viable.
So what you're saying, once per month, and if that's not financially possible, do once per quarter, right?
Exactly.
As I mentioned, you are a serial entrepreneur, and my next question is, how can one stay successful or become successful as an entrepreneur? I
guess there's so much advice there. I've been doing it for so long, and as you say, I'm sort of a serial entrepreneur. So I guess at the end of the day, the greatest expectation is for an entrepreneur, you don't leave the office at 5. And even if you physically left the office at 5, your mind is still there. It's an overwhelming commitment. And even if you're home-based or not home-based, regardless, it's a lot of work. And I, dare say, more work than some of the corporate jobs because you have so much riding on it. You have so much vested in it. And then you just have beyond all the risk factors, there's just the ego. You want this to succeed. It's your baby. So, the greatest expectation is that it's going to be a life-altering event, entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. Achieving and maintaining a semblance of work-life balance is very, very difficult. So I'm a huge proponent of planning. I mean, I have lists for lists for lists for lists. I mean, I document and I write down, and this way I don't forget anything. I have plans and strategies for almost anything, and that includes work-life balance. You have to write into your calendar scheduling time with your significant other or your children or one-on-one with each of your children. Time for yourself, getting to the gym, all of this, you really need to map that out and stick to it because work-life balance is very difficult and it becomes overwhelming. And then it becomes not fun. And that's not the point of it.
I really appreciate that you talk about work-life balance because that is very important for someone to sustain him or herself to continue working in his own, on his own business. So what suggestions, what strategies do you have for folks that might not be so successful in work-life balance? You mentioned write down things that you need to do. Any other strategies?
Again, I think overarching, that's the biggest one, to really plan it out and not just plan it out, to stick to it. And, for a lot of people, that's really hard to make that commitment to themselves or to their family. They feel like, this one time they'll understand, like really being super regimented, I found, is just key to success, kind of compartmentalizing. And even in the course of your business day with entrepreneurship, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, during this window, whether it's employee meetings or business partner outreach or whatever it is, do that at that specific time so you can, move on to how you map everything else out. So that compartmentalization and really the stick-to-itiveness, really remaining committed to that, I think is the most important. And then just as far as work-life balance, just being in those moments. Mm-hmm. You may not have 3 hours to spend going to see a movie with your kids. Maybe it's 30 minutes because it's a particularly difficult week. Mm-hmm. Be 100% present in those moments. Don't even have your phone with you. Zero texting, zero emails and that kind of thing. Same thing with your work constituents. If you're having a meeting, so important to give folks that just dedicated 100% attention, being present, letting folks know, that you're hearing them. So I think, as far as a strategy goes, if you kind of keep that at heart, you'll do okay.
So you mentioned the word success, and I was wondering, how do you evaluate your own success?
In many ways. I mean, there's so many different definitions of success. Revenue, I guess, is the go-to for most people, that they're being profitable. So clearly, that tends to reign supreme. But beyond that, this is an ever-changing definition for me. At this stage in my career and my life, it really is more about work-life balance. 10 years ago, my measure would have been different. It might have been how many, new clients I've acquired in a given year, how many clients I've retained in a given year, how many referrals I'm getting in a given year, because that speaks to clients that are happy with my work and they're referring business. And therefore, I don't have to undertake sales and marketing and business development efforts. The work's just coming to me. So there's so many ways to slice and dice how you're determining whether you're successful or not. But, right now for me, if I can maintain a sustained revenue and certainly increase that, continue to bring in new business, because I think that is a measure of success always. For me as an agency, and agencies are different than a lot of other companies. An agency, I really, really seek to develop long-term relationships. For budget reasons, it's not often realistic for companies to do the month in, month out, or even quarterly campaigns, but to have repeat clients coming back to me year in, year out over the course of many, many years, that's how I measure success. If I was continually doing these one and done, and never working with the same folks, that would probably say something about me that I wouldn't like very much. Mm-hmm. That's definitely still a measure. And then I guess my stress level, if I can leave work at the end of the day and feel accomplished and just not having it hanging over me that there's unfinished business at this point in life, that's definitely a success.
So I'd like to segue and talk about your book that you wrote for children. It's has two editions. One is for boys and one is for girls. And it's called Making Healthy Choices, a story to inspire fit, weight-wise kids. Can you tell us a little bit more about the book?
Sure. It's a book very near and dear to my heart. On the personal side, I'm very involved in health and fitness and nutrition. I did some fitness competitions way back when and really have always just embraced a very healthy lifestyle. And then, of course, I became a mom. I have 2 children and was really just kind of overwhelmed with the amount, how difficult really society has made it for children to make these healthy choices. Mm-hmm. You know, whether it's in the house because they're watching television with certain commercials, certainly out of the house with the preponderance of, fast food, and even at school with vending machines. It really shocked me when I became a mom how difficult it was to keep my own children on what, my version of a healthy track. And that doesn't mean denial and, completely denying treats and having them, have sweets and that kind of thing. Everything has its time and place, but it just was so difficult. So I just was overwhelmed with the desire to write this book and help other parents, come up with the ways in their everyday life to make just one easy choice after another. It's not difficult. They're very simple choices. They're just strung together in a course of a day that keeps, these kids healthy.
Mm-hmm. So the book is for kids, right?
It is for kids. It's written for kids. It's in a childhood kind of tone and voice. There's a section at the end of the book, a parent section, to have the parent initiate a dialogue with the child. Because a lot of times, parents don't know how to approach their kid to talk about a weight problem, or they don't want to upset or insult the child, or the child gets defensive because they've tried in the past. This way they can read the story, maybe together or separately, but then at the end of the story they could talk about the character. How did Matt or how did Patty feel about this situation when it happened? How did they deal about the situation? So there's this parent section to spur dialogue. At the end of the book, there's also a recipe section and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And we can get the book, both books are available on Amazon, correct?
Correct, Amazon.com.
So, this show is about leadership, and I was wondering, are there any traits a leader needs to have to be a truly successful leader?
I do. I think first and foremost, they have to demonstrate that they have some level of expertise in the field in which they're operating. And that may or may not be specific to the product line, but it might be the industry at large. I feel like leaders tend to embrace ingenuity. I think today to operate in this kind of marketplace, you really need to be creative and look at how you can be doing things differently. And a good leader definitely looks to their people to help develop those ideas. Good leaders really don't want to be the only person bringing all of this compelling ideation to the table. They want to cultivate a team, develop a team, empower a team to think out of the box, to be innovative, to have ingenuity, and to feel comfortable enough to approach them. A really good leader is approachable. And that means to everybody at any level of the operation. This is down from the C-suite management to literally down to the janitorial team. I don't care who has an idea in that company. If they have something that they feel is a good idea and want to bring it to the table, they should somehow be enabled and empowered to do that. So a good leader definitely would embrace that kind of approach. I also think good leaders today, they embrace, on some level, sustainability and eco-consciousness. I think that companies today really need to operate in a responsible manner, environmentally. So I think that's really important. That's really resonating, especially with the millennials and the up-and-coming generation. So that's definitely really important as well.
Mm-hmm. And in your opinion, what is the most difficult part of being a leader?
I think probably conflict resolution and, in the PR realm, crisis PR is probably, the least fun. So how a leader deals with adversity really is probably the most difficult and the most trying time, that they'll have in their career. So being able to navigate those situations and in a way that maintains kind of a customer-centric sensibility. There was the situations recently, the airlines just had that horrible image crisis, the way passengers were being treated and that kind of thing. So being able to handle, and solve problems and resolution within your industry or company, your own protocols and methods and procedures, and do that in a way that doesn't alienate the marketplace, that's difficult and challenging. So a leader that can do that is probably going to be pretty successful.
What I'm hearing is that you have to be always on your feet and think proactively how you communicate to the various shareholders, right?
Absolutely. And proactively, I think, is an important term. I tend to function that way in business. I'm more proactive than reactive because I tend to think, you can maintain more control that way. And I mean control in a positive sense. So yes, you don't want to wait, and kind of hide until it hits the fan. I think taking a stance or taking a position, articulating it, talking, explaining why a leader might be going one direction or another. The more people understand about why decisions are being made, the more they can get behind and embrace those ideas. So for a leader to say, we're doing it this way because I say so, or because I think it's a great idea, not great. I think to really explain the methodology there and the strategy behind it and the objective and the vision for it, I think will definitely resonate much better.
So I really like that you talked about it because in leadership change is something that's happening all the time. So how does one effectively lead through the change?
I think consistency. If a leader is vacillating, especially if you are going through a reinvention or a crisis management situation, or if people in general are just averse to change, that people get very comfortable with the way things are done, especially if those ways have been pretty successful. So when you're speaking about change and you're trying to take folks in a new direction, just being really consistent in the approach and trying not to vacillate, not to contradict what I said earlier about being able to pivot and be agile and be responsive, because that's important too, but being able to, in those situations, like I said, be very communicative and transparent with those decisions. People are going to be less scared. Fear makes people jump ship and do all kinds of things. So, the more transparent you could be, especially during a change cycle, again, the more support a leader's going to have, the more people can get behind it. And even if they don't agree with it, they can at least understand, why you're going in one direction or another.
So transparency, openness, and being available always to communicate, right?
Exactly. And consistent. I mean, you don't want to be speaking out of both sides of your mouth, so to speak. If you said, we're doing this because of this, and this is our reason why, you need to mean it and believe it and remind people that that's the end game. And, don't say one thing in a few months, you've had some blowback and, now you're making a complete change, at least without explaining that. Hypocrisy is never a good thing in business or any time for that matter. So, you just want to avoid as much as possible being positioned or blamed as being hypocritical in any way.
Another question that I get asked a lot is how much should one communicate when it comes to change or crisis?
I am a huge advocate of just communicating in general. So even just in a normal business cycle, I think that today's leaders who are very present and approachable and communicative, and they have dialogue with their staff members, whether that's video-based or they regular emails or they're having staff meetings or company-wide meetings. I think it's so important for leadership, not be sort of in a gilded cage, just completely out of touch to the rest of the company. So to have this sort of relationship and to make everybody feel like, wow, I know this person and I like this person and, this is why I'm working for the company. People want to believe. But especially during a change cycle or crisis management, again, everybody's fearful. Everybody's concerned. People, have the opportunity maybe to go to competitive companies. A lot of attrition happens during those change cycles. So particularly during those periods, it's imperative. And not just a CEO, I mean other C-suites on down to departmental leaders, team leaders. I think there should be a tremendous amount of communication, transparency, a lot of encouragement, reinforcement, so everybody feels like they're on the same page. No one feels alienated or like they're lost in the course of what's happening.
So you're an expert in media, and my next question is, what are your thoughts on how does actually media impacts one leadership style?
Well, for better or worse, it probably does. I tend to prefer a leader to sort of be who they are, and the media can sort of report on that as they should be. But reality is a media coverage or media's opinion of a leader can sometimes change the leader's behavior, and sometimes that's for the better, sometimes that's for the worse. But at the same time, the media can be, a really great gauge and benchmark, kind of like having their pulse on collectively, how a marketplace might be feeling or how a certain population might be feeling. So I think it's wise to keep tabs and, what is the media saying? And if there's value to it, if it's valid, not mean-spirited, for example, if it happens to be, maybe a not very glowing situation. But if there are ideas to be had, even in a negative situation, there's always gems, as I call them. There's always a way to take something of value from any situation. So, what's being said that might change or enhance what you're doing if it has value. So, you have to look at what's being covered in the media, each story or each report in and of itself. It's kind of hard to give a blanket answer of that. But I guess my short answer would be, whether it's positive or negative, do your best to find those valuable nuggets that are in there. And if it can be applied to your career, great.
And it seems to me, take it as a learning lesson. Don't take it personal, right?
Absolutely. And the leader, no matter how successful, the leader who feels like they have nothing to learn anymore, their days are numbered. I mean, unquestionably. Today's leaders, not only do they need to continue to grow and evolve and learn, they want to. And that's discriminating factor. They embrace knowledge and how can they do better? Sort of, no matter how good things are going, it's sort of never good enough. They're driven by this real desire to overachieve, often the good leaders. So, it's so important whether that knowledge and key learning is coming from the media, their own people, your neighbors. You have to be able to embrace advice. And some have the ego doesn't really let them, like they know everything, they've done everything, and, they just sort of shut it down and they'll nod and smile and that's it. And, really that's not the way to go.
So you led many companies, as I mentioned before. Do you believe that every leader is a good manager?
That's a really good question. And, probably say, no in literal terms. Leadership and management can sometimes be mutually exclusive, and sometimes a leader, and it depends on the capacity of the leader. Are you talking about a CEO? Are you talking about a team leader in a very specific department, like maybe the technology department, where it's all about brainstorming ideas and having these kind of brilliant, innovative strokes of genius? So it really, again, depends on the context. A leader is at the very least smart enough to put folks in place who are good managers, because at the end of the day, you're only as good as your people and your team, and you need to know how to lead a team in an effective way. So if they themselves, maybe they're not a people person, they could be more reclusive, they could be more introverted, whatever the case may be. They do need to be smart enough to hire the right folks, their direct reports, to be able to handle their own areas of weakness, and knowing there's no shame in saying, you know what, I'm really not a people person, but this person is, and, together we can work to communicate with the team and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying to us, leader does not have to control everything and every aspect of work, right?
Well, they shouldn't. I mean, they'll literally burn out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, their brain will blow up. I mean, sure, they should be knowledgeable and debriefed and certainly be involved in planning and strategy and taking a look at the analytics and kind of the higher level. Again, it depends on the size of the operation. If you're a 5-person team versus a 500-person team, your level of involvement is going to be vastly different. Generally speaking, a leader leads others on who are executing. And optimally, I find that a leader, when you get bogged down with the minutia, the machine, the the daily grind, so to speak. You don't have the time to do all of this higher level thinking and strategizing and making relationships and business deals that are often required, and just becomes diminishing returns on all fronts. So definitely best if you have really talented people that can execute.
So you talked a little bit about delegating just right now. I want to know if you can add something more to delegating responsibilities.
Again, I think it goes to having the right people doing the right job. Sometimes budgets are a problem and you don't have the ability to have multiple layers of management, and that certainly can be a challenge, especially right now. So, you do your best with what you have and, empower everybody. I mean, as much as management is ultimately accountable for their team, their direct reports, let those direct reports understand that they have their own accountability managing their own functions, and to the extent that they feel like if the delegation is out of their wheelhouse or they're just overwhelmed, having that line of communication as part of what's being delegated or not can really help avoid some problems. But that's the whole point of having a team, is so that you can delegate things to the right person. You've got various experts in an operation. You've got operational folks, you have customer service folks, you have, in retail, you have frontline salespeople. Having the right person doing the right job is really, really important. Mm-hmm. So you always want to be, taking a look at those analytics and what numbers could need to be improved, and sometimes reallocating, how things are being delegated, or if they're being delegated, maybe inappropriately by management. Sometimes management wants to be a little more hands-off, and that's not really very effective. So it all depends on the operation. But at the end of the day, I think a leader's time is best spent on some of the higher level strategic endeavors, and letting the team execute.
And what I'm also hearing is being reflective and mindful how he or she goes about doing the business.
Definitely. You want to get there in a way that brings you comfort and peace and that you can be proud of. And, whether you're delegating or executing or coming up with strategy, to do that in a mindful way that has folks' best interests at heart, whether that's your own employees, your industry at large, your company's reputation, your own family, whatever that means. Sure. I mean, mindfulness should be a fundamental part of any strategic effort.
Any thoughts on generosity and leadership?
Absolutely. Today's companies, those who are cause conscious and that give back to communities and that, are not selfish per se, that they're really looking to benefit a greater good of some sort. I'm a very big proponent on corporate philanthropy, and, many of the brands that I cover on the Luxe List, for example, they're giving various sales proceeds to various organizations, and they're cost conscious or one way or another, and I definitely advocate that. I think there's just so much need in the world in so many different ways. And, besides it just being a corporate strategy and a marketing ploy to be able to claim that, you are philanthropic, and many companies go about that in ways that they don't even promote. I just think that in today's environment, especially with millennials and the up-and-coming generations, some won't even do certain business with companies unless they have these kind of endeavors. So I think it's the right thing to do, and there's a million different ways to slice and dice how one goes about that. So there's really no excuse not to nowadays.
Thank you so much for mentioning about social corporate responsibility, because that's huge. So for the ones that might not have in their organizations, what would be the ways that one can put that into the place?
In terms of social corporate responsibility, I mentioned, just fundamentally giving a portion of sales proceeds. Mm-hmm. There's some companies I'm aware of that are supporting educational endeavors of their own staff or staff members' family members. They're, gathering their employee groups and, for example, during Thanksgiving time, they might all go help the needy or homeless somewhere. They're organizing this in a systemic way. The HR department has very concerted initiatives. Often there's a team or a task force, or at the very least an individual who is mandated to develop these ideas and then hopefully execute on some of them. So there's just so many ways to go about it. Like I said, it builds morale, it decreases churn. Companies can really maintain employee bases. Employees really just buy into the company. They're proud to work for these kind of companies. They bring new employees into the fold because they make recommendations. Only good things tend to happen, when you do have that social corporate responsibility component.
Mm-hmm. And what you're saying to us, you don't have to give outside. You can actually give within your company by giving money towards scholarships and other things.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be big and expensive and grand. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, certain teams or departments or individuals have just had, the employee of the month, the good old employee of the month,
mm-hmm.
they get a great park spot, they get a day off, they get a free lunch. People want recognition, and the more that recognition and support can extend beyond a staffer or the company into the community, the better, because then it really builds on the cause consciousness. But there's just so many ways internally to handle that do not require a lot of budget.
And talking about employees, a lot of people here in New York talk about diversity in the workplace. What are your thoughts in terms of why do you think the diversity in the workplace is so important?
A company, again, is only as good as the people there, and hopefully the leader is developing and cultivating that open line of communications with their people. So diversity brings ideas from all different walks of life and backgrounds and education levels and department levels and staff levels. A company doesn't want to be one note. They don't just want to have one perspective on a given situation. I always encourage a contrarian point of view. And in the PR world, we develop campaigns very specifically around that contrarian point of view. And it's really important. And without, a truly kind of representative, diverse group of people, it's really difficult to have this holistic ideation, to be able to see this big picture. Because a leader doesn't want to be blindsided with, wow, well, I didn't think of that. Mm-hmm. So, diversity helps prevent that. It helps to see these bigger picture opportunities, or whether you're solving a problem. It brings so much to bear in a more comprehensive way.
And it seems like what I'm hearing is kind of creates a check and balances between what you think and what is, right?
Well, it does that as well. It really opens up possibility. I guess at the end of the day, if you had to boil what I see as the benefit of diversity, besides just general fairness and, everybody should have an equal chance at opportunity, as far as how a company benefits, it just, to me, it truly maximizes all of the possibilities. No matter, again, if you're looking to develop new ideas or solve problems, I think you need the most varying amount of perspectives to be able to see an issue, and then you can make your plan accordingly.
Do you believe that being assertive helps you lead better?
Yes, definitely being assertive. I mean, a leader should be able to garner the respect of their people, but assertive in a way that's not off-putting. You still, again, you want to be approachable, you want to be affable, you want to be respected. And somebody with just a mean-spirited image or that kind of thing. So you definitely want to put forth an image that is just positive, relatable, that people are going to like, I guess at the end of the day. Being assertive, I see that as being consistent, and sometimes if you know that your idea is a good one and, being able to kind of stick to your guns and being able to articulate what you think is right, but in a way where you're not undermining others and insulting or that kind of thing. But yeah, being assertive is definitely a part of leadership because, it's that authoritativeness. People want to feel like you're a leader, and they want to be able to get behind that. So to be assertive is definitely okay. You just have to be able to do it in a way that's not going to alienate folks.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying, be assertive, but don't be insulting.
Exactly. I mean, you can be assertive without it being aggressive. Mm-hmm. And that's where you have to be able to distinguish the two.
So this leads me to my next question is, how do you stay humble while leading others?
Well, you have to stay humble. It's just so easy to get caught up in numbers and success and the inevitable yes people that, are no matter what you say, they're happy with it and the answer is yes. And, it's very easy to get caught up, in the ego of it all. And then there's often the monetary remuneration that you're getting from kind of being at the top of the food chain there. I think the best way to stay humble, engage with your people, go eat lunch in the cafeteria with them, hang out with them, a little bit. Just, go have these informal chat sessions. When you're passing somebody in the hallway, like I said, maybe somebody on the janitorial staff, say hi, have a conversation. I mean, staying humble means that you're, again, approachable, that you're a real person. Folks feel like you don't necessarily perceive yourself as being better than them or above the law and that kind of thing. And owning up to your mistakes. I mean, not every decision a leader makes is going to be a great decision. And you know what? Owning that and owning it in a public way, following it up with a plan and other strategic ideas is smart, but show your human side. You know, when you're even communicating with your staff and that kind of thing, don't, let it be this jargon-filled, your speech has been written by professional writers. You just want to have a human, natural conversation with folks. That's the best way to stay humble.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying to us, be accessible, right?
100%. And not only to be, but to insert yourself proactively into those situations.
Interesting. So not only make us available, but actually act upon it, right?
Exactly. Being humble means you don't necessarily consider yourself, or at least let it be perceived that you consider yourself better than others. It's lunchtime and you're just going to go get your tray and sit with a team and chat about whether it's ideas for the team or what's going on with their families. And, you don't always want to talk about business. People want to know that you do care, you're interested in their life. A good leader will ask about their families and things beyond the business realm. It's a great, great way to stay humble.
So you are a woman leader, as I mentioned before, and my next question is, any thoughts or suggestions for women leaders?
It can tend to be a dangerous question because, I don't like there to be a double standard for women. I guess the reality is, the glass ceiling is very real for many, and not so much these days as in the past, but, some women, I guess, still struggle with that. I mean, for women, I would say, all of the advice, tips, things that we've talked about today, they're as applicable for women as they are men. I think for women, I would be just a little bit more careful. I always advocate just really maintaining an air of professionalism, whether that's in, the garments and the apparel that they're wearing or the approach. But that, honestly, that same advice, goes for men as well. But for women, I just think to really maybe make that over and above effort, working overtime, you can't, let the family concerns. A lot of women tend to, have a greater role in their households with respect to caregiving and the children and that kind of thing. To the extent that they can, just let everything remain equal in a workplace and perceive that they're equal, whether it's out of office time or their ability or inability to work overtime and that kind of thing. I just try to minimize that. I try to do everything as you would, irrespective of whether you're a man or a woman. You have these personal concerns outside of the workplace so that there can be no real discriminator. Well, there's no judgment if a manager was, considering roles for a promotion. If a woman happens to be up against a certain man and he didn't have to leave the office as early every day, that kind of thing. The more you can eliminate those differences, the better.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying to us, a leader is a leader and it's not attached to a gender.
I vehemently agree that. I mean, I think men and women equally can be phenomenal leaders. It's more about strategy and style and execution, has absolutely nothing to do with gender.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of leader are you? What's your leadership style?
I think everything that I've sort of gone over today in this interview, I mean, these are things that I either adopt in my own businesses or certainly that I aspire to continue evolving toward. My companies are relatively, my agencies and that kind of thing on the smaller side. So I'm lucky, I'm able to engage with my subordinates and my constituents, and I can be very, very hands-on. So I guess in a nutshell, that would be my strategy. I'm very hands-on. I tend to be involved in as much as I can on some level, touch points, interfacing with folks. But I have the luxury of doing that because, I'm not in a multi-layered deep corporation. But, I would advocate that, to the extent that even folks leading in a larger company can, that, hands-on style is probably never going to be frowned upon. But yeah. So I tend to be as present as I can in the operation.
Mm-hmm. And what is your mission in life?
In life, my mission is really, at the end of the day, I want, and I have children, I want to have succeeded on my own. There's a tremendous amount of pride that goes with not only launching a business, but sustaining your own business, especially over many, many years, earning an income, growing the company every year, and continuing to cultivate and shift and change and evolve and have new ideas and stay fresh. That's so exciting, and it's something, I love modeling for my children. So, my mission is just to continue being able, I guess, to be an entrepreneur, because I guess at the end of the day, if entrepreneurship failed, you'd have to go get a job for another company, and that's not really the track I've chosen to take in life. Mm-hmm. So if I can remain an entrepreneur until the day I retire, which is probably never, because it's not in my blood, mm-hmm. I'll probably just be an entrepreneur my entire life. But, at some point I'll start throttling back. But to be able to work for myself, be responsible for my own success, to be able to build and navigate and create and control my own future, if I can do that over the course of my career, I'm beyond successful. I'm blessed.
Any final thoughts?
Really just reiterate, just going back to the being human, speaking human approach. I think in today's world, you just get so caught up with, it's just we're so inundated with messaging, and, you got text and email and the internet and advertising, and there's just so much content that we're constantly being bombarded with. I think whether, it all boils down to communications. And I talk to, kids who are getting ready for college and they don't really know what their major is yet. Mm-hmm. I always advocate, I say, hey, go into communications. You may not know what you want to be when you grow up, but no matter if you're in sales or healthcare or, retail, any industry, if you're an effective communicator, you will be successful. If you know how to write, articulate ideas, you're well-spoken, you're able, public speaking is always a great thing. So I say, embrace communication, but in that process, being able to just be human, have a natural, real-world conversation, engage with folks on an emotional level, you'll be in good shape.
Mm-hmm. And how can people get in contact with you?
Either of my companies, actually, on the PR side at Kern Communications, that's Kern Communications.com, and then on the Luxe List side at the Luxe, Luxe List.com.
Great. Thank you so much for being a guest on our show.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And with that, thank you all for tuning in and listening to the Leadership with Biana Kovic show. Wishing you a wonderful evening. Please remember that you're all leaders in your own rights, and that impact that you're meant to achieve starts with small acts of kindness, curiosity, and generosity. Please come back next Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Until then, thank you again and have a great night.